I'm really interested in the changes that occur when you take impressions or when you have a reflection. There's always this change. And so in this piece, I'm very specifically making these changes in the reflection. So there's this implied reflection of the figure where her clothing is actually changing, and then that image is then reflected, and the face actually changes. It's a different person. Then I additioned this piece, and ultimately I used the addition to flesh out the pattern. And so it's an alternate way of thinking about what an addition can be used for. And it was right at this time when I was really sick of making patterns. So that's a good time to start talking about some newer work. So I'm becoming more and more interested in the relationship between works that I'm making. And in fact, it's very rare nowadays that I ever just show a single picture plane as a statement. I've already talked to you a little bit about state proofing and the importance of that, but I'm exploring more and more the conversations that different pieces are having with one another when I put them together, and exploring different strategies for that alignment. This is one example of that. This is certainly a piece that's quite clearly about absence and presence and positive and negative space. The imagery that I'm using here all has some aspect of concealment to it. And I think that idea is further supported by this kind of separation of picture plane and the removal of one image from the other. So I think what I was doing is I was taking those patterns and I was kind of ripping them up and letting them scatter on my studio floor, and then pouring a bunch of color on top of them. And that was refreshing. I mean, they're still very controlled images, but this is from Art Spiegelman's book, Breakdowns. And that word also has a double meaning. I mean, it's the tortured illustrator breaking down after hours and hours and hours of labor. And then, of course, the breakdowns of the image, the CMYK breakdowns, and the misprints and the various use of color to get the different images. And I'm essentially doing that same thing in my work. I really like the finished image that I'm making, but I also really like putting that finished image in the context of proofs. There's not really a logic to the narrative of this image, but if you think about the cover-up piece which I just showed you, which kind of almost referenced like a constellation or an illustration of constellations in the night, I feel like now I'm kind of sweeping all that torn up imagery together into this box. So the piece on the left is a breakdown, and the piece on the right is the finished version. I really like thinking about these images as kind of being their narrative. They tell a story, but I really like thinking about them as futuristic, kind of American Gothic representations of some untold story. Piece on the left is Charles Burns' illustration from Black Hole, which is just an amazing graphic novel. And then there's the cover of Pearlandra, which is not a very good book, but that cover is amazing. I love the scale change, and then the discrete placement of the clouds and the woman's hair is amusing. But I love the feel to it, and I love the use of color. This next piece, Lioness, these are screen prints, by the way. I'm using the silhouettes, I'm using the negative spaces of the different components and filling them out with color and doing some color exploration. And then here you see the final image. And in this next piece, it's a series of 8 images, and I'm kind of combining what I was doing in the previous 2 pieces, where I've got the breakdowns and the color explorations with the silhouettes kind of all working together. And I'm just going to kind of quickly flip through these pieces, and you can get a sense of the transitions. So I'm really trying to have fun with these pieces over the course of their creation. I mean, the last final print is certainly very carefully registered, and it involves 30 or 40 colors or something like that. But over the course of its creation, I'm making a lot of misregistered prints, and I'm flipping things upside down, and I'm printing in alternate colors, and this is all carved out of rubylith, and some of you can appreciate that if you've ever carved anything out of rubylith. But I'm flipping the rubylith around and exposing it on the screen backwards, and then printing that, and I need that when I make something, when I get engaged in a process. I need that kind of playfulness. And so it's really important for me as an artist to show that in the final work. Kind of concurrent with this activity, I'm starting to explore more and more with the concept of movement and repetition. I'm going to show you a series of slides that I guess I would consider them drawings or sketches. But I'm really interested in finding something or creating something, and then through the act of repetition and movement, creating an alternate composition. And so these are some of those explorations, and I'm just finding similar effects between images. These are all part of a booklet called 9/11/02. And they were inspired by this bumper sticker that I saw on a car when I was driving into work one day that said 9/11/02, don't ever forget. And I was amazed. I wasn't sure if it was sarcasm or if it was just a terrible mistake or if it was just world weirdness. Probably all three. I like it when a repeated image that's shifting becomes texture. And when it becomes texture, it really changes the way that an image can function. It becomes much more of an object as opposed to an illusion. So this summer, I got myself involved in making these huge graphite drawings. I'm saying huge, they're 22 by 30. That's big for me. And I almost think of these as kind of being epic works. They took so long to make. You really have to see them in person because they're really about the surface quality. But I did this series of 3 images. They're each called Call of the Wild. And they're really informed by that technique of movement and repetition. And what I'm doing with these images is I'm taking an illustration and I'm putting an illustration into a screen, and then I'm reducing it, and then I'm very playfully painting with that screen to generate an interesting composition. And then I'm taking those compositions and I'm blowing them up and recreating them in graphite. And so you can see the illustration on the left and the resultant image on the right. And I was working from these illustrations where it was a dog on dog, and then a dog on man, and then a dog eating another type of animal. Just from this old Call of the Wild book that I had from when I was a kid. So I'm going to kind of push towards the end here, and I think I'm doing pretty good with time, but I just want to finish up by showing you a series of triptychs that I've been working on, including one that I've just been working on actually this weekend in the print studios here at Mica, which has been really great. I started aligning different images that I was making together, and I think making new associations in a different way than I ever have before, making a lot of pieces and then finding connective tissue between them has been a really fun activity. So these aren't really state proofs, and there's not a direct relationship between the images. The relationships are purely conceptual, and I'm starting to interject a certain amount of personal anecdotes into the work. I think because I'm getting older and more sensitive to my mortality, I'm thinking a lot more about the experiences of my youth, and that's coming out in my work. This is a piece called From the River to the Ocean, and it's about when I was living in St. Louis before I moved down to Miami. I used to love going to the river at night. My friends and I would always go there and get into trouble, and one of my favorite things to do down in Miami was go to the ocean at night, particularly South Beach, where you could stand on the beach and behind you would be just the massive amount of information that is South Beach, and then in front of you would be the ocean, and it was really beautiful, and the lights from the buildings behind you would reflect into the surface of the water, and if there were clouds that night, it would create all sorts of amazing illusions. But that was my favorite time in Miami, to go to the beach. And so the piece on the right, you can see that's created in a similar way to the way I was just describing with the Call of the Wild pieces. It's taking the image on the left and breaking it down. With all of this work, when I start to create these triptychs, there's always a lot of work behind it. So when I was creating that piece with the eyes and the reflection in the water, that was generated from this alternate series that I was working on. And it's a series of portraits where just the eyes are visible, and these are all 22 by 30 graphite pieces. And one of the reasons why I'm using graphite for this work is because of the this really sensitivity of the surface and the way that subtle variations in value occur because of the texture. And I think one of the things we do is we start to impose, we start to fill out the image. And so if you look at these images for long enough, you can kind of start to compose a face or the shoulders or the features, the hair or something like that, even though those things don't exist. And these are all specific people, actually. These are stills from the movie Black Christmas, which is a great movie, 1974. So you can see what I might be thinking about when I'm making those portraits where it's just the eyes. On the left is a photograph from Aaron Hui, and on the right is one of Daniel Newman's black paintings, which are amazing. He takes found paintings and stains them with black, oftentimes cropping out like 99% of the painting, just a very small amount is visible. But it's a really amazing series. So here's another triptych that I'm putting together, and this is particularly about a friend of mine, and that's a portrait of her in the middle. She's missing her middle finger through a kind of a funny accident. But there's the flow of the hair, and the hair is capturing, or the wind is kind of blowing the hair, and then the piece on the left is also about that kind of movement and that kind of flow, and it's made from the breakdown of that piece in the middle. Just to give you a couple of studio shots of how these images are made, you can see the stencils are cut out of that translucent paper and they're taped down. I developed this kind of system of working with these flaps, and you can see the brushes and you can see the palette on the left there.